graders, I hope everything has been going well for you. Today we are going to start lesson 2.2, which is still on decimals. So our topic is still representing decimals. So it's the same topic as yesterday, but our learning target is going to be a little different today. Our learning target is that I can compare and order decimals using a number line. We're going to be using a lot of number lines today to help us through comparing and ordering. Alright, so let's get started. We are going to split this lesson into 2 days, okay? So this first page we're going to do today, and then tomorrow, on Thursday, you will go through this next page, okay? So we're going to split it up so that we can focus on a few things instead of all of it all at once. Okay, so let's look at this top part. We need to divide the number line into tenths, then place each decimal on the number line. So I have a number line from 0 to 1. What I want to do is I want to split this up into tenths. So that means I need 10 lines in between 0 and 1. So I like to split it in half first. So this right here is halfway. So it would be 0 and 5/10. Okay, so that's my halfway point. So now I need 1/10, 2/10, 3/10, and 4/10 on this side. And then I need 6/10, 7/10, 8/10, and 9/10 on this side. Because this 1 is my 1/10, which is really just 1. Okay, so I need to split this up into 3 more lines. So just do your best at trying to make sure they're all even. Oops, I need 4 lines, sorry. So I'm going to do my best at making them even. So this right here is 1/10, this is 2/10, this is 3/10, and this right here is 4/10. Then I have 5/10, so now I need 6/10, 7/10, 8/10, and 9/10, so 4 more lines. Try to make it as even as you can, but if you can't, that's okay. Just do your best. Oops. 0 and 8/10 and 9/10. Alright, so I have my number line split up into tenths. I hope yours is split into tenths as well. Just remember that you can always pause the video and keep working on making your number line and then come back when you're ready to start the next section. Alright, so here are all of my points that I need to place on my number line. So we're just going to start in order. So change your color to a red because our first one is A and it's red. So we aren't going to say this as 0.7. We know from the last lesson that this is 7/10. Okay, so we're going to find 7/10 on our number line. So here's 1/10, 2/10, 3/10, 4/10, 5/10, 6/10. Here's 7/10 right here, and I'm going to label this as A. So that one was kind of easy because it was right on where we had already filled out our tenths. Okay, let's look at the next one. Letter B is blue, so get your blue color out. Now this time I have 35, and this is the tenths place, this is the hundredths place. So I have 35 hundredths. Okay, so if it helps to stop so that you don't need to keep moving back and forth, you can write it up here, 35 hundredths. So that tells me I'm going to find 3/10. So right here is 3/10, but it's not at 3/10. It's at 35 hundredths. So here's 3/10, but it's not quite to 4/10. This 5 is telling me I'm in the middle. So right here, about somewhere in the middle, would be 35 hundredths. Doesn't really look in the middle to me. Sorry, I'll try that again. There, that's a little better. Do your best at making sure it's in the middle. It doesn't need to be exact, but make sure it's as close as possible. All right, so that's B. Our next one is letter C, which is green, so change your pen to a green. Now this time I have 183 thousandths. It goes tenths, hundredths, thousandths. Okay, so I'm going to write that up here. 0 and 183 thousandths. So again, I start right at the beginning. I have a 1/10. So that tells me I'm going to be somewhere between 1 and 2. I'm not quite to 2, but I'm somewhere in between there. My second number in my decimal place is 1800ths. So that tells me I'm closer to the 2 than I am to the 1. Right? If this was like a 2 here, then I would be closer over here. But it's an 8, so that tells me I'm pretty close to my 2/10. And my last number is 3 thousandths. So 3 thousandths is very, very small. So we're just going to do our best at placing our number somewhere towards the 2/10, but not quite at the 2/10. So I'm going to say that 183 thousandths is somewhere around there. So I'm going to draw my decimal place and label it letter C. Alright, and our last one. Change your color to a yellow. We have 900ths. Okay? Tenths, hundredths, 900ths. So let's go over here and let's write that above. Alright, now here's where it gets a little tricky. Our first number is 0/10. So that tells me I'm not even to my 1/10 yet. Okay? My second number is 900ths. Remember, 900ths is really, really small. So 900ths would be somewhere closer to over there. Oops, I'm sorry. 900ths would be closer to 0 or closer to 1. What do you think? Yeah, this 9 is pretty close to bumping this 0 into 1. So 900ths would be closer to my 1/10 than my 0. Alright, and this is letter D. So that is how we place decimals on the number line. If you have any questions about that, please be sure to reach out and ask for help. Alright, let's look at the next set of directions. We are going to express the value of each number using the number lines. So if we look at our first number, I have 8 and 153 thousandths, because it goes tenths, hundredths, thousandths. Okay, so right now we are going to be filling out a lot of number lines. So if I am going too fast for you, remember, pause the video so that you can get to where I am and then play the video when you're ready. Okay, so we are going to split our first number line into tenths. So just like what we did up here. Because 8 and 153 thousandths is somewhere between 8 and 9. Right? It's not quite to 9, but it's past 8 because we have decimal numbers after the 8. So we're going to split this up into 8 and 1/10, 8 and 2/10, 8 and 3/10, 8 and 4/10, and so on, all the way until we get to 9. 8 and 6/10, 8 and 7/10, 8 and 9/10, and then our last one is 9, and they already have it written for us, so you don't need to write anything. Alright, so now we are going to place this number on our number line. So we look at our first number. I have 8 and 1/10. So that tells me I'm going to be somewhere between the 1/10 and the 2/10. I'm not quite to that 2/10 mark, but I'm somewhere in between there. So I know I'm going to be in here somewhere. Okay, my second number is this 5. So that 5 tells me I'm halfway between 8 and 1/10 and 8 and 2/10. Okay, so that means I would be somewhere in here-ish. And then this 3/1000, remember, is very, very small. So you can move a little bit closer to the 8 and 2/10 because it's not 8 and 0/100. Okay, so I would say 8 and 153,000 is somewhere in here. Alright, but now we are going to break our number line. We're going to pretend we are magnifying glasses. And now we're going to worry about all the numbers between 8 and 1/10 and 8 and 2/10. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. Right here at the beginning, this is 8 and 1/10, and way at the end, this is 8 and 2/10. So it's like we are using a magnifying glass to zoom in on this section right here. Alright, so that means we need to label now our hundredths. So this right here is 8 and 1/10. So right here, let me change colors, would be 8 and 11 hundredths. Okay, this right here would be 8 and 12 hundredths. This would be 8 and 13 hundredths. 8 and 14 hundredths. 8 and 15 hundredths. All the way until we get to 8 and 2/10. Alright, remember, if you haven't gotten there, you can pause the video. So now I have my number line. Now we're going to look at our number again. I'm going to erase all these marks on my number so it's a little more clear. Alright, so I have 8 and 153 thousandths, but we're going to look at the first two numbers. So we know this is 8 and 1/10. So now we need to find 8 and 15 hundredths. So 8 and 15 hundredths would be right here. Okay, but we need to look at our next number, which is a 3. So that 3 is telling me I'm somewhere between 8 and 15 hundredths and 8 and 16 hundredths. And that 3 isn't quite halfway, so it would be somewhere closer to the 8 and 15 hundredths. Alright? So now we're going to pretend we're a magnifying glass again, and we are going to zoom in to this section right here so that we can exactly plot our point. Alright, so this right here, our first number would be 8 and 15 hundredths, and then the number way over here would be 8 and 16 hundredths. Okay? So now we're going to pretend we're zooming in, and now we're going to worry about our thousandths. Okay, so zoom in and start filling out your number line. If you're stuck and not quite sure how to fill it out, you can watch how I fill it out, and then we'll plot our points together. Alright, so we have 8 and 151 thousandths. 8 and 152 thousandths. 8 and 153 thousandths, and so on. And then I keep going, 8 and 154. And it's okay if you kind of write to the side so that your numbers don't get all mixed up. 8 and 156 thousandths, 8 and 157 thousandths, 8 and 158 thousandths, and lastly 8 and 159 thousandths. Alright, so now we're going to plot this point. I know it's somewhere between 8 and 15 hundredths and 8 and 16 hundredths. So now we're going to find 8 and 153 thousandths. So 8 and 153 thousandths is right here on the line. And that is exactly where our point is. Alright, so our first number was tenths, and then we split our number line into hundredths, and lastly we split it into thousandths so that we could plot our point exactly. Alright, let's look at the second one. We're going to do the exact same thing as we did before. Okay, if you want to try doing it yourself, you can pause the video, and then you can play the video and see if you got it right. Alright, so I look at 3 and 782 thousandths. So I'm going to split my 3 and 4 number line into tenths. So I have 3 and 1 tenth, 3 and 2 tenths, 3 and 3 tenths, 3 and 4 tenths, and so on, all the way to 4. Alright, so my first number is 3 and 7 tenths. So that tells me I'm going to be somewhere between 7 tenths and 8 tenths. And then we look at our next number. That 8 in the hundredths place is telling me I'm going to be closer to the 3 and 8 tenths than I am to the 3 and 7 tenths, because that 8 is telling us I'm way closer on the number line than I would be if it was a 2. And then our last number is really hard to use to figure out where it is on the tenths, but it's saying it's 82 thousandths. So I think this point right here is pretty close to where it would be. It doesn't need to be exact yet. It will be exact when we get down to the bottom. Alright, so now we're going to use our number line and we're going to zoom it into this section right here. So my number here is 3 and 7 tenths. And then over here is 3 and 8 tenths. Alright, now we're going to break it into hundredths. So I have 3 and 71 hundredths, 3 and 72 hundredths, 3 and 73, and so on. Alright, so I have my number line filled out. Now I look at my number. It's 3 and 78 hundredths. So that tells me I'm going to be somewhere between 3 and 78 hundredths and 3 and 79 hundredths. But now we need to look at our last number. That last number is a 2. So that tells me I'm not going to be super close to the 3 and 79 hundredths. I'm going to be closer to the 3 and 78 hundredths, because on a number line, 2 is closer to this number than it would be to this number. So I'm going to say 3 and 782 thousandths is about there. Alright, and now we're going to use a magnifying glass, and we're going to zoom in to this section right here. Alright, so my number over on this side is 3 and 78 hundredths, and my number on this side is 3 and 79 hundredths. So now we're going to split it up into thousandths. Okay, I have 3 and 781 thousandths. Thousandths. 3 and 782, 3 and 783, 3 and 784, and so on. Alright, and now I'm done filling out my number line, so now we're going to plot the point. So 3 and 782 thousandths would tell me my point is exactly right there. Alright, so this example was like we were magnifying glasses and we were zooming in to figure out exactly where the point would be plotted if we broke our number line into tenths and thousandths and, tenths and hundredths and then thousandths. Okay? If you have any questions about that, please let me know. So our last section that we're going to do is we are going to use our number line to estimate the decimal located at each letter. So we're going to zoom into number 1. So right here, this 1/2 is really 0 and 5/10. Okay, so if it helps you to write that out, then that will make it easier to estimate our decimals. Alright, so our first letter is A. And A is somewhere before the 5/10. So would you say this is at like 4/10 or 3/10? What do you think you would estimate this decimal to be at? I'm going to estimate it that it is at about 3/10 or 35/100. I would say like 4/10 would be somewhere in there, and 3/10 would be somewhere in there. So I think it's somewhere in between there. If you said 4/10, that's a good estimate too. Just make sure your answer is somewhere around mine. Okay, now let's try letter B. Letter B is somewhere after 5/10. So I would say letter B is at somewhere around 6/10. I would say 6/10 is probably in here, and then 7/10, and then 8/10, and probably 9/10 about there. So when I divided it up into my tenths, that tells me my C is probably pretty close to 7/10. Alright, and my last one, D, I said this line here was my 9/10. But that D is pretty closer to the 1 than it is to the 9. So I would say it is about 96/100. So these are just estimates. As long as your answer is pretty close to what I said my estimate was, you'll be fine. We're just estimating. We don't know exactly what it is yet. Okay, let's try one last one. Number 2. So again, whenever I see 1/2, I'm just going to write 5/10 because it means the exact same thing. Alright, so A, I would say that is probably 3/10. So I would say 4/10 is there, 3/10 is there, 2/10 and 1/10. So I would say A is pretty close to 3/10. Alright, and then I'm just going to break up my number line. So I have 5/10, I would say 6/10, 7/10, 8/10, 9/10. So I would say B is not quite to 6/10. So I would say it's 5/10, and how many hundredths? I would say it's pretty close in between there. So 55/100. Alright, letter C. So I said this one right here is 7/10, this is 8/10. Sorry, that was really sloppy. So C isn't quite to 8/10, but it's past 7/10. So I would say it is about 74/100. It's somewhere in between 7/10 and 8/10, but I would say it's not quite halfway yet to in between exactly. Alright, and our last one, I have D, which is way past my 1. So I can just keep splitting this up into tenths. 1/10, 2/10, 3/10. So I would say D is probably about 1 and 2/10. It's past my 1, so that's why I write a 1 there. Alright, so this is a lot of number lines. I hope this made sense. If it didn't, please message me and ask me for help. I'm more than willing to set up a Google Meet if something isn't quite making sense, or I'm very open to answering any messages through Schoology as well. So please reach out if you're struggling, okay? Tomorrow we're going to talk about comparing and ordering decimals. So right now, you can do IXL F8. It's all about decimals and number lines, and we've done a lot of decimals and number lines. So you can go ahead and get started on that, and then I will see you in the